Montana Territory, late August, 1879. The wind carried the smell of dust and pine through the Bitterroot Valley when Fletcher Rhoades spotted her alone on the trail, her dress torn at the hem, hair tangled, sunburned cheeks, and cradling a baby wrapped in a faded blue blanket. She looked like she had not eaten properly in days. No wagon, no horse, just her boots scraping over dry dirt, and that baby held close like her heart was stitched into his little chest. He pulled his mare to a stop, the leather creaking under his weight. "Ma'am," he said, voice steady but quiet. "Where you headed?" She looked up, blinking like the sunlight had betrayed her. Her arms tightened around the baby. "I do not know," she said, voice raw. "Just away." Fletcher dismounted slowly, keeping his hands where she could see them. "Name's Fletcher Rhoades," he said. "You got a name?" She hesitated. "Tessa Zeller." The baby stirred, letting out a soft whimper. Fletcher glanced around. No tracks but hers. No sign of others. "That your boy?" Tessa nodded. "His name's Nolan." Fletcher stepped closer, slow and careful. "How long you been walking?" "Since the sun came up," she said. "Yesterday." His chest tightened. He looked at the baby again, saw the cracked lips, the way he clung to her blouse. "You'll never walk alone again," Fletcher said. Tessa's eyes filled, but she did not cry. She just held Nolan tighter. "Let's get you both out of the sun," he said. "My camp's not far." Fletcher's camp was tucked beside a crooked pine near a bend in the creek. He laid out a blanket for her and fetched water from his canteen. Nolan, barely 4 months old, was too weak to cry much. Tessa dabbed water on his lips and drank some herself, her hands shaking. "You got folks?" he asked as he stirred beans over the fire. Tessa shook her head. "Not anymore." He did not push. She looked like a woman who had been pushed enough. After they ate, Nolan finally slept, and Tessa sat quiet beside the fire, her arms loose around her knees. "I was married," she said at last. Fletcher looked up. He was kind at first. Then he wasn't. Her voice stayed even. "He took off with the wagon and the horse 3 nights ago. Said the baby cried too much." Fletcher set down his tin plate. "I waited. Thought maybe he'd come back. But he didn't. So I walked." She looked over at Nolan, curled on the blanket. "I wasn't going to let him die out there." Fletcher nodded once. He felt something heavy settle in his chest. Not pity, something deeper. Respect. "You got grit," he said. She gave a small breath of a laugh. "I do not feel like it." "You do not have to." The next morning, Fletcher gave her his horse. "You ride. I will walk." Tessa hesitated. "But it is yours. You and Nolan need it more." She looked at him, then really looked. "Why are you helping me?" He shrugged. "Because someone ought to." They rode toward Darby, a 2-day journey. Fletcher stayed close, never crowding her, but never far. He caught her watching him when she thought he wouldn't notice. She smelled like dust and milk and lilac soap that had long since worn off. Nolan began to perk up with food and water in him. Fletcher whittled him a little horse from pine scrap, and Nolan clutched it with both fists, wide eyes studying the shape. "You are good with him," Tessa said. "I had a sister with babies," Fletcher said. "Learned to hold my share." She gave a soft smile. "You are not what I expected." "What did you expect?" She looked at him, cheeks warming. "Someone who would look the other way." Fletcher met her gaze. "I saw you." By the time they reached Darby, Tessa was standing taller. Fletcher helped her rent a room above the general store and brought supplies from the mercantile: diapers, oats, dried apples, and a small tin of lye soap. She looked at it all, then at him. "I can pay you back," she said. "I do not want your money." "Then what do you want?" Fletcher looked at her, his voice low. "I want to know you and Nolan are safe." Her chin trembled, but she nodded. He tipped his hat. "I will be back tomorrow." "Why?" He paused. "Because I said you would not walk alone again." She did not stop him. But when he glanced back at the top of the stairs, she was still there, holding Nolan close, watching him with something new in her eyes. The next day, Fletcher came back with a crate of wood and nails. "What is that for?" she asked. "A crib. You should not have to hold him all night." He built it on the back porch while Nolan slept, and Tessa watched from the doorway, arms crossed, but eyes soft. "You are a cowboy," she said. "I ride fence, mend line, drive cattle south sometimes," he said. "But I am mostly just a man trying to do right." She stepped closer. "You do not even know me." "I know enough." She touched the edge of the crib, then looked at him. "You built something for us." "I would build more," he said quietly. Tessa stood there a moment, then reached for his hand. Her fingers slid into his, warm and small. I believe you would. He squeezed her hand gently. I am not going anywhere. And she believed him. Nolan's quiet breathing filled the room as the evening settled into the valley. Fletcher leaned against the doorframe, hat in hand, watching Tessa smooth her son's blanket with slow, careful hands. The window behind her was cracked open, letting in the scent of sun-warmed pine and the faint murmur of horses from the livery down the street. Tessa turned, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. He sleeps better when you're nearby. Fletcher stepped inside, closing the door softly behind him. Maybe he knows I ain't the type to leave. She nodded once. I don't expect anything from you. I know that, he said. But I've got things I want to give, all the same. Tessa looked at the floor, her voice quieter than the creak of the floorboards. I haven't known many men to do something without expecting something back. I'm not them, he said. And I ain't in a hurry. She looked up then, her eyes steady. You always this patient? He gave a slow shake of his head. No. But with you, I reckon I could be. She tilted her head, studying him. Were you ever married? No, he said. Got close once. She wanted a town life. I didn't. Tessa walked over to the small table where a tin lamp flickered low. You ever think about settling now? Fletcher watched her turn the lamp wick down. Lately, I've been thinking on it more than I used to. She didn't smile, but her voice softened. I used to think staying in one place would feel like being trapped. He stepped closer, just enough that the scent of her skin, clean and faintly sweet from the lye soap, reached him. And now, I think it might feel like breathing again. They stood in silence a moment before she reached for the shawl draped over the chair. I've got to walk down to the mercantile before it closes. There's washing powder I meant to get earlier. Fletcher glanced at Nolan. I'll stay here, keep an eye on him. Tessa hesitated. You sure? I wouldn't offer if I wasn't. She paused at the door, her hand resting on the frame. He doesn't wake easy, but if he does, he likes to be held facing out. I'll remember that. As she stepped out into the fading light, Fletcher turned back toward the crib. Nolan stirred once, then quieted again. Fletcher sat in the rocking chair nearby, boots planted firm on the floor, the room still except for the hum of cicadas outside. By the time Tessa returned, the last traces of daylight had faded. She carried a paper-wrapped bundle under one arm and unlatched the door with careful fingers. Inside, the lamp had been turned up again. Nolan lay nestled in Fletcher's arms, wide-eyed but calm. Fletcher had one finger resting against the baby's hand. Neither of them moved when she entered. He likes you, she said. I like him back. She set the bundle on the table. He's never taken to anyone like that before. Fletcher gently eased Nolan back into the crib. Babies know who means them no harm. Tessa stepped closer, her voice low. What are you looking for, Fletcher? He met her eyes. Something I can build that ain't just fences and corrals. She looked down at Nolan. You think it could be with someone who's been broken? I don't think you're broken, he said. I think you've been hurt. There's a difference. She reached out, her fingers brushing his. You're the first person to say that. He took her hand, warm from carrying the bundle. Then I'll say it again, if you need. She nodded, her throat working around the words she didn't speak. Then she leaned in, resting her forehead lightly against his chest. His arms came around her without hesitation, one hand resting between her shoulder blades. Outside, the night deepened. Inside, they stood quiet, two people who had seen too much and were beginning, just barely, to believe in peace again. The day slid into a quiet rhythm, autumn creeping in slow across the valley. Mornings brought a veil of mist over the roofs of Darby, and Tessa had taken to wrapping Nolan in a wool shawl Fletcher traded for at the trading post outside Stevensville. He came by each day, sometimes with kindling, sometimes with a parcel of dried pears, once with a book of psalms worn soft at the corners. It was late afternoon when Tessa found him out back, mending the garden fence that edged the alley behind the general store. She held Nolan against her hip, his round face peeking from under a knitted cap a neighbor woman had gifted. You don't have to keep fixing things, she said, brushing windblown hair from her brow. Fletcher straightened. I don't like seeing things fall apart when they don't have to. She stepped closer, the hem of her skirt catching on the grass. You don't talk much about your people. He wiped his hands on his trousers, gaze steady. Not much left to talk about. My pa died working cattle in the Judith Basin. Ma followed the winter after. I drifted after that, mostly south and back. You ever think about leaving again? He looked at her, the wind stirring the loose strands at her temple. Not anymore. She shifted Nolan to her other side. You're not just being kind, are you? No, he said. Not just. The quiet stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but full. I was thinking, she said, eyes on the fence post he'd just driven in, of asking Mrs. Tilly if she needs help with the sewing work. I can stitch straight. I did all Nolan's clothes by hand. Fletcher nodded. That'd be good. She pays in coin and flour, Tessa added. Enough to keep us fed through winter if I'm steady. I'll keep cutting wood for your stove, Fletcher said. She studied him. You didn't ask if I'd stay. You just started building around it. I figured if you wanted to go, you would've. Tessa's fingers curled into Nolan's blanket. I don't want to go. He stepped closer, his voice low. Then I'll keep building. She looked up at him, her face unreadable for a moment. Then she reached for his hand and placed it gently on Nolan's back, where the baby lay warm and breathing slow. You belong with us, she said. Then that's where I'll be, he answered. They stood there as the wind moved through the dry grass, the world narrowing to 3 heartbeats and the soft hush of the season turning. The first frost came in the night, whitening the rooftops and stiffening the earth behind the store. Fletcher arrived early with a basket of root vegetables he'd bartered from a widow with a cellar full of them. Tessa opened the door in a wool shawl. Nolan balanced on her hip, his cheeks ruddy from the morning chill. You didn't have to bring all that, she said, stepping aside as Fletcher entered. I know, he replied, setting the basket near the hearth. But I figured you'd use it. She adjusted Nolan's cap. I was boiling water for washing. You can sit if you like. He didn't sit. Instead, he crouched near the fire, checking the logs in the stove box. I'll split more wood this afternoon. This won't carry you through another week. I've been putting aside what I can, she said. Mrs. Tilly gave me sewing for the schoolteacher today. Hem repairs and some lace trim. Fletcher nodded once, then glanced at her. You ever think about staying here longer than winter? Tessa stilled. That depends. On what? On whether what we're doing here is real, she said quietly, or just something we're holding on to until the frost passes. Fletcher stood. I've never meant anything halfway with you. Her eyes didn't leave his. I don't know how to trust that yet. You don't have to know, he said. You just have to live in it long enough to see it don't change. She looked down at Nolan, who had fallen asleep against her shoulder, his breathing soft and even. That kind of steady don't come easy to me. I'm not asking for easy, Fletcher said. Only asking if you'll let me keep showing up. She let out a slow breath, then nodded. All right. He turned toward the door. I'll cut that wood now. Fletcher, she said before he stepped out. He stopped. There's an extra chair in the corner. It's yours now. He didn't say anything, but when he left, the door closed with a softness that hadn't been there before. That evening, Tessa stood in the back room, folding the schoolteacher's skirts with care. Nolan lay on a quilt nearby, fist clenched around a piece of twine. When Fletcher returned, carrying a bundle of split logs under one arm, the scent of pine sap clung to his coat. I found a fella outside town, he said, setting the bundle down. Wants to sell his milk cow. She's not old, just lost her calf. Tessa looked up from the table. We haven't got pasture. I asked the livery, he said. They'll stable her for a small fee. I'd cover it. She studied him. Why go to all that trouble? So Nolan has milk through the winter. So you don't have to choose between sugar and eggs. Her hand stilled. You keep doing things that make it hard not to believe in you. I'm not trying to make anything hard, he said. I'm just trying to make things hold. She walked over to him. And if I said I'm scared to let you, I'd say that's the first thing you've said that makes you like me. He didn't reach for her, didn't move. Just stood there, the firelight catching in the folds of his coat. She stepped into him, her hand finding the space just above his heart. I want to stop being afraid. His voice was quiet. Then I'll be here while you do. That night, while Nolan slept in the crib Fletcher built, Tessa sat beside him in the rocking chair, her shoulder against his. They didn't speak, didn't move. Just watched the coals settle and breathe as if they'd already made it through the longest part of winter together. By the first true snowfall, Tessa had cleared space on her shelf for 2 tin mugs instead of 1. Fletcher had started bringing books from the little borrowed stack he kept with the liveryman's daughter, a girl who liked to read but had no one to read to. Tessa would sit at the table in the evenings, mending sleeves or piecing together scrap cloth for Nolan's next size of shirt, while Fletcher read aloud in his low, steady way. One morning, while the snow still clung to the eaves and the town moved slow under its weight, Tessa stood over the stove stirring cornmeal into a bubbling pot. Nolan sat on a quilt near the hearth, teething on a wooden spoon Fletcher had carved the night before. Fletcher stepped in from outside, stamping snow from his boots. "Liveryman says the cow's bred. Come spring, we'll have a calf." Tessa turned, her hand still on the spoon. "That's good. Means more milk than we'll need," he said. "We could trade the rest." She wiped her hands on a cloth. "You keep saying we." "I do," he said, and leaned his shoulder against the wall. "Because there ain't a part of this I see myself apart from." She didn't answer at first. She crossed to Nolan, lifting him into her arms when he began to fuss. His cheeks were flushed, his gums sore. "I never thought I'd have a home again," she said. "You do now," Fletcher said. "And I'd be proud to make it official." Tessa looked up. "You mean?" "I do," he said. "If you're willing." She walked to him, Nolan heavy against her side. "I want to say yes. I just need to know you'll stay when it gets hard." Fletcher touched Nolan's back, then rested his hand on hers. "I've already stayed through the quiet. I'll be here through the noise." Her eyes held his. "I believe you." They married before the thaw. Reverend Haskins performed the ceremony in the front parlor of his home, his wife baking a sweetbread that perfumed the room with cinnamon and clove. Tessa wore a dress she'd hemmed from old muslin, and Fletcher wore his cleanest shirt, collar pressed sharp. Nolan wore a tiny waistcoat the blacksmith's wife had made from leftover wool. Afterward, they walked home together, Fletcher carrying Nolan wrapped in a wool blanket, Tessa's hand tucked around his arm. The snow had begun to melt in patches, revealing the dark earth beneath. Inside, the warmth of their stove welcomed them. Fletcher set Nolan in the crib and turned toward her. She reached for him without hesitation, resting her forehead against his chest. "I don't feel afraid anymore," she said. "You shouldn't," he said. "Not with me." She leaned back just enough to look into his face. "I love you." Fletcher smiled, quiet and sure. "I've loved you since the day you looked me in the eye and told me you didn't know where you were headed." She laughed softly, pressing her face against his neck. "Turns out I was headed home." They stood there, the fire crackling low, Nolan murmuring in his sleep, and nothing left between them but the rest of their life. Years passed, and the valley bloomed green each spring. Tessa kept the sewing work for a while, but let it go by the time their daughter, Miriam, was born 2 summers later. Fletcher built a lean-to for the cow and a coop for chickens, and they grew potatoes in the back patch behind the house. Nolan grew sturdy and bright-eyed, always with a carved toy in one hand, following Fletcher's steps through the pasture. He never asked about the man who left them behind. He never had to. Most evenings, they sat on the porch after supper, Fletcher's arm around Tessa's waist, Miriam curled asleep in her lap, Nolan sprawled on the step with a stick and a patch of dirt to dig in. "Do you ever miss the trail?" Tessa asked once, watching the dusk settle across the valley. Fletcher looked out over the land, the barn, the smoke curling from the stove pipe, and the children safe inside. "No," he said. "This is where I was always meant to stop." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "And I was always meant to be found." They stayed there until the stars came out, the night quiet except for the soft breath of the wind through the pine, and the sound of their hearts, steady and whole.